Greetings, saints of the Most High. Rod Thomas here, coming to you on a beautiful, overcast, but a crisp, lovely, beautiful fall Shabbat in the DFW. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to fellowship with me on this blessed day of rest in Messiah Yeshua. And as always, beloved, it is my hope, trust, and prayer that this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer finds you, your families, and your fellowships well and blessed. As I'm posting these thoughts and reflections, it is the very last Shabbat of the 7th biblical month, November 2nd, 2024. And assuming our contacts over in Israel are successful in sighting the renewed moon on the evening of this post, we will enter the 8th month of Yah's biblical calendar year, of which I should mention that if you are new to Yah's reckoning of time, that is Yah's reckoning of time through the observational calendar, you should know there are no mandated feast or set-apart days or moedim for this coming 8th month. In fact, we will enter a dormant period of some 6 months on Yah's sacred calendar year. The next feast or moedim won't be until next spring, this upcoming spring, when we will look to Yah's creation once again to alert us when Yah's next biblical calendar year will begin and when the spring feast of Yah will take place. And so we take this dormant phase, these 6 months of Yah's calendar year, to reflect, to conduct introspection upon that which Jehovah has done for us this past year. Consider the blessings and our shortcomings. Look at the fruit that we bore. Was it good fruit or for the kingdom, or was it bad fruit for the kingdom? Or indifferent? Nothing. We did nothing for the kingdom. As well as the lack of good fruit. Did we not make the mark? Did we fall short? What did we not do? And can we do better? We also begin planting spiritual seeds for the coming year. Seeds related to our purpose in Yeshua Messiah. Preparing for next year's spiritual harvest in our walk in Messiah. And that, beloved, is our aim here on TMTO, the Messianic Torah Observer. That is to equip us to walk in kingdom. Walking that exceeds righteousness, the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees that our Master instructed us to walk in, to prepare for the coming kingdom of our Master Yeshua here on earth. And Abba willing, we have several teaching and ministry activities we plan to post and publish and hopefully bless you with in the coming several months during this dormant period, what I call a dormant period. It really isn't dormant, but it is a time in which we can recharge and ready. And, when we look at Yah's calendar in Israel, this was the time when the planting for the spring harvest begins. We start planting and preparing for our next crop. And usually it's barley in that part of the world, planting barley seeds, preparing for the upcoming winter season in which we get rains and the soil is recharged and renourished and so forth, similar to our spiritual walk with Messiah. So that's what we hope to do here on TMTO. As well as we will be looking at entering areas of ministry that we never thought we would. And I'll be sharing a little bit about those areas of ministry a little later on in this discussion. So, there are a couple things I want to share with you. A few things I want to share with you. I want to update you on our ministry here at TMTO, as well as I want to give you my thoughts and reflections and a synopsis of our recent Kenya Missionary/Sukkot trip. Yes, we just got back this past week from the country of Kenya over in Africa. I'm not kidding you. It was quite a quite a trip, and I'm going to share with you some thoughts and reflections that I gained from that trip. And I'm quite kind of looking forward to that, as well as I'm going to give you right now an update on our ministry here at TMTO. Now, if you've been following the Messianic Torah Observer for any length of time, especially most recently over the course of the last few months, you will have noticed that I've not posted any new content since early September of this year, 2024. There are two big reasons why. In September, the second week, I believe, in September, we had a catastrophic technology problem in which all of the programs on the computer I use to do postings and to process the postings and to just to create the content had I don't even know how to describe it. I'm not technologically savvy, but let me just tell you, I was putting some content, creating some content, and at night, as I was shutting down the computer, it was giving me alert, giving me a prompt, if you will, that I needed to, before I shut down, update the operating system, which is something that happens quite frequently, as Microsoft does often. I didn't think anything of it, and I went ahead and said, sure, go ahead, update, then shut down. Well, the next morning I got on, I had nothing. I had nothing. Everything was gone. All of my programs gone, all of many of the content, and I don't even know what to say. It was a blank slate. So I had to do a hard default reboot of the computer just in order to get it to boot up to the start screen. And of course, the rest is history. I had to start from ground one to get back up to a place where I can actually get back to doing TMTO again, which took me a month, the rest of September. The problem, that wasn't the big problem, because fortunately, I had the foresight of having all these things outlined and what I needed to download, the programs, getting them back. A lot of it's in the cloud, so getting that back up. The content I also had backed up on thumb drives and such. So it wasn't horrendous. It wasn't like a devastating existential event technologically. It was just an inconvenience. The problem was, the beginning of October, we were departing and heading to Kenya for the month of October. For most of the beginning of the month of October, even into the Feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. All this in October. Involved in that, I had to also prepare a handful of sermons or messages that I was going to deliver to various groups over in Kenya, and as well as all of the huge preparatory things we had to do for the trip. So I just said to myself, after the second or third week in September, I said, I'm going to put all of the TMTO stuff in the hopper, in the background, and when I get back, I will try to get back to some semblance of normalcy with TMTO. And that's where we are today. I've got everything back sort of in order here on our technological side, as well as we've completed successfully our missionary trip to Kenya, and that is going to play a huge role in the ministry for TMTO looking ahead. Which leads me, or segues into what's ahead for TMTO over the course of the next 6 months going into 2025. Well, what I need to do is update the website. so that it provides some kind of significant, powerful, essential kingdom preparation content and to improve user friendliness. There's a reason for this, and it has a lot to do with the trip to Kenya. I'll get into that later on when I reflect upon some of the issues related to our trip to Kenya. I also want to continue the focus of kingdom readiness, walking in kingdom, preparing a people to receive the coming kingdom of Jehovah. Also, we want to continue our mainstay, which is content related to the weekly Torah readings. As you know, or you may not know if you don't follow us, we follow the 3-year Torah reading cycle. And a lot of the content in which we published, especially here in 2024 and 2023, were centered around the weekly Torah readings. So we want to continue that. It's not to say that we're going to do a Torah reading discussion every week. There are some weeks in which we will be discussing content and topics that are important and related to our faith community. I want to continue the Paul and Hebrew Roots series. We have been working on that for the last 5 or so years, a long time on the Paul and Hebrew Roots, and we're just scratching the surface. We've only made it through halfway through the book of Romans, and we want to continue that tradition, that teaching series over the course of the next few years, Abba willing. We want to also promote and support Kenyan and Tanzanian believers through the TMTO footprint on the web and provide the believers over in Kenya and in Tanzania significant teachings that will help them. And again, I am talking about our trip, and I will get more into what those issues are related to the brethren over in Kenya and Tanzania. We want to also, we may be also taking a secondary trip to Kenya and possibly Tanzania. We've been invited to Tanzania next year. Whether or not Abba has us go or not, that's entirely up to him. Right now, we are learning to walk by faith, and we go where he says go, and we don't go where he says do not go. So we are going to be very cognizant of what he wants from us. We are very excited to help, very excited to get engaged and involved over there, but we're going to wait for Father's leading and direction and instructions as it relates to that. We, in terms of back to our TMTO postings, we're still looking at adding video to our postings instead of it just being audio, which has been our mainstay throughout. Video is very challenging for me. Let me tell you, I'm 64 years old, and trying to teach an old dog new tricks is very, very challenging. So that's going to require me to get back in. We had done video back in 2017, 18, and even parts of 2019. And that was challenging then. I got away from doing video once we transitioned from California over here to Texas. But now I feel the necessity to also get back into the video realm because I'm not going to fool myself. Video is where everybody goes today. YouTube is huge. And if we want to reach more and more people with the true faith once delivered, and the content of the TMTO ministry, we've got to branch out into video. It's just that simple. And I just going to have to buckle up, settle down, and learn the latest methods of video in order to make that important leap from just plain audio to video as well. And as I mentioned in this over the course of the last several months with TMTO, we are working on writing and publishing a couple, maybe 3 books for 2024, 2025. So that's what we have going on. That's the latest update to this ministry. Lots on my plate. It's exciting, but it's also very, how should I say it? Very ominous. But you know, Yeshua said, what seems impossible to us is not impossible for God, for Yehovah, our Elohim. He can work all of this out and more. It's just a matter of me putting my trust in him and following his lead. If I put the effort out there, he will help me get in and do that which he has placed on my heart to do. So it's just a matter of me trusting and not leaning to my own understanding, my own wherewithal, and so forth and so forth. He will provide the means, method, and everything to make all of this happen. Now, that's the update for TMTO, the Messianic Tour Observer, for the remainder of 2024 into 2025 and then over into the new biblical calendar year. Now I want to transition over to the synopsis of our Kenya missionary trip. As I just mentioned, this goes way back into the spring of this year, 2024. We were invited by a brother, dear brother in the faith. I haven't gotten permission to mention his name. So until I get that permission to actually mention his name here online, I'll leave him out. I'll just call him Bob. I'll just call him Bob for the moment. Just so we have a point of reference, back in actually a year ago, actually this month makes a year ago, I met Bob through a mutual brother in the faith. In fact, that other brother I was in ministry with over the course of the last 3 years. The mutual brother introduced me to Bob, who was visiting here from Kenya, and he was doing fundraising for an orphanage over in Kenya. And upon meeting Bob, he invited Hillary and I to come to Kenya and do some evangelistic work, as well as to attend the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. Well, when he first brought that up, we kind of said, yeah, that's an interesting prospect. We'll pray about it. We'll think about it. We'll look at our finances and see if it's something that we could do. But we never truly took it deeply serious, because it's not only on the other side of the world. So it's the logistics of getting from Dallas all the way over to Kenya, but it's the financial burden that would be incurred upon us personally and upon our ministries in order to get there. But we again were trusting Father would make it happen. Well, by the spring of this year, Bob had been in contact with us once he returned to Kenya a few times, and we outlined a course of action, a mission plan, if you will, for us to engage in, presuming we would go to Kenya and do the ministry, do some ministry over there. And so between early spring all the way up to this summer, we engaged multiple times through emails, through WhatsApp chats, as well as GoToMeeting online sessions. And before we knew it, as we head into The last 2 or 3 months, we had purchased airline tickets. We had our lodgings in place and our ground and air transportation once we were in country all kind of working out. And it turns out that we were also going to be going over to support a nonprofit organization that was working the orphanage that Bob was employed by. So we had, before we knew it, we had probably a dozen of us heading over to Kenya for this 3 to 4 week period, this month-long missionary trip. So on now Kenya, if you don't know, is an African nation. It is it's a good 24-hour trip, at least from Dallas, Texas, all the way over to Nairobi International Airport. But when I talk about 24 hours, it's like a 21-hour flight. And I don't think there's any direct flights going into Nairobi. Maybe there are. Maybe Kenya Airlines flies out of Dallas Fort Worth International. I don't know. But we didn't take Kenyan Airlines. We took Qatar Airlines. So we were flying from DFW International Airport with a connector in Doha, Qatar, or Qatar. And then we connected to that flight in Doha over and landed into Nairobi Airport in Kenya. So 21 hours actually in the air with a 4-hour layover over in Doha both ways. So you're right at 24 hours. So you're going to lose a day in traveling, just in traveling. So we left. And bear in mind that Kenya is also 8 hours ahead of us in Texas time. So when we were ever dealing with Bob over in Kenya, we had to factor in that he's 8 hours ahead of us. So we left late on Saturday, October 5th, like 11 o'clock at night. And we arrived in Nairobi on Monday morning, like at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. So we arrived there in Nairobi, and our host, Bob, he had his team, he had his staff meet us at the airport. They picked us up, beautiful, right on time. Everything was wonderful. We were exhausted. We felt grimy and dirty because we were in the air in an airplane for 21 hours plus the overtime and layover over in Doha. But once we got there, we loaded up into their van, and it was actually just at the beginning. There were, like I said, there were over a dozen of us actually participating in this, and they were coming in groups of 2. We were the first group, and there were 4 of us coming in the first group, and the remaining 7 and 8 or 8 people were flying in the following day. It just so happens that we weren't taking the same flights. One group was coming out of Georgia, and our group was coming here out of Dallas, Fort Worth. So we were very happy to be the first group in because we were able to check into our hotel room in Nairobi and kind of get cleaned up and settled and get some food. That was Monday. And then on Tuesday, by that time on Tuesday morning, we met the second group who had come in late that night on Monday. And so we all got together and we outlined our activities for the coming 3 weeks there in Kenya. And then first thing on Wednesday, October 9th, we actually loaded up ourselves onto what I call a puddle jumper. It is a prop plane where we picked it up over in another airport in Nairobi, not the international airport, but an airport called Wilson. and over in Nairobi. And it's been a while since I've been on a prop plane, a puddle jumper, and so it was a little anxiety. It's not the massive aircraft that we took from Gutter Airlines. This was significantly smaller and very loud. And so, but we were able to process there and get on the airplane, and we headed on up to a city called Kahancha, Kenya. And that was a 40-minute flight from Nairobi to Kahancha, where we met our host, who was headquartered, Bob, over there. And we were taken over to the orphanage where we met the students, many students, over 100 students, wonderful, beautiful children who were students, and they actually lived there at the orphanage over there in Kahancha. I was taking many pictures. Hopefully at some point we will be able to curate all those pictures and videos that I took and put them somewhere for you to enjoy at some point. Right now, our plate is full, and we're going to be able to try to get that done sometime over the course of the next month or two. But we spent the rest of the day on Wednesday, that first week, working in and with the staff and the students over at the orphanage, the school over there in Kahancha. Hillary attended a few of the meetings with the staff members throughout that day, and then we were hosted with a dinner over at Bob's home that night. And then the next day, Thursday, we went ahead and took a minibus up to our first missionary trip, and that was to visit the widows and hear their plight and offer them assistance in a training program. This was Hillary's missionary purpose one of her purposes over there in Kenya. And so we traveled from Kahancha to a city called Homa Bay. Now, Homa Bay had about 24 widows that came to a central location and a home that is up in the hills of Homa Bay. Gorgeous, absolutely stunning view of Victoria Bay, the largest freshwater body of water in all of Africa, and I think in all of the world. It's just a massively large lake, and we were up in the hills of Homa Bay overlooking the bay. Stunning views. But in the midst of that beauty, in the midst of that scenery, is poverty, abject poverty. And the widows, unlike here in the United States, because one of the biggest criticisms of people who attend to the widows and orphans in African countries and other places of the world is we have those here in the United States. Why don't you care for them? Why don't you take care of them? Well, in defense of that, we have to know that our country is a very compassionate country. And there are many opportunities, social opportunities for those entities, the widows and the orphans, to receive care, from local to state welfare systems that actually provide people with opportunities to survive. Well, in Kenya, there is no welfare system. There are no social programs. So when a woman who may have children loses her husband, they're on their own. And if the husband was the breadwinner of the house, they are forever impoverished. Their children become orphans, and they're left on their own, or as much as the widowed can provide for them. So they are in desperate need So that's why Hillary does what she does. She knows that she has tried to provide services for widows and orphans here in the United States, but there really was no true need because states and localities have social programs and there are welfare programs that are available to orphans and widows in this country, but that does not exist there. So Hillary addressed the widows of Homa Bay. She interviewed several widows and informed them about her training program that was designed to get them out of poverty and provide an income. Teach a man to fish and they will have food for the rest of their life. And that's her mantra. That's her purpose, is to teach the widows in Kenya, in various segments of Kenya, to fish so that they can provide for their individual needs and the needs of their family. So she addressed about 24 widows there, and they were very, very excited about her and her program, and she has a plate full of widows that she is going to be working with. I want you to keep that in mind because as we progress in this discussion and in future discussions, I would ask you to prayerfully consider supporting her ministry for the widows and orphans over in Kenya. And just as an aside, her nonprofit organization, it is a true nonprofit organization called Qumran Family Foundation. Qumran Family Foundation. You can find her on the website at qumranfamilyfoundation.org. And if you are led and you have a willing heart and you care about this mission, I would ask you to prayerfully consider donating to this worthy cause, because there are people, there are widows, there are orphans who are in destitute situations. They're impoverished and they need our help. And it's not just giving handouts, it's teaching the widows, which will also trickle down and provide the orphans of those widows and of these families, these destitute families, with the means to pull themselves out of poverty. But we'll talk about that at another time here. But now we stayed overnight in Homa Bay, and then the next day on Friday, October 11th, we returned to our home base, which has become Kahancha. Remember, Kahancha over in Kenya is where the orphanage is. And so Kahancha kind of became our base of operation for the first half of our trip. And so we actually returned there, and by that time it was the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, and at services on that evening I delivered a message entitled "The Two Afflictions That Get God's Attention." The two afflictions that get God's attention. Abba willing, and I'm so led, I may post it. I think I recorded it. If it's suitable to post, I may post it in a future posting here on TMTO for you to enjoy, and hopefully it will edify you. Now, when I say that it was Yom Kippur, it wasn't Yom Kippur on our observational calendar, but we were actually kind of entrenched. We weren't forced to, but because our host, Bob, follows the calculated Jewish calendar, the calendar we were kind of being shuffled into, let's just say, was the calculated Jewish calendar. But we kept in our mind and in our hearts and in our behavior the observational calendar, because our Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement, wasn't going to be until that following Sunday, the 13th. So just keep that in the back of your head. It really is inconsequential to what I'm talking about in terms of our what do I want to say? In terms of our synopsis of the trip. Then on the Sabbath, that Sabbath, October the 12th, we had Yom Kippur services at the orphanage with the 100+ students and staff who were observing the Day of Atonement. So everyone was fasting, a full fast, and the cherry on top of that day was the baptism of 14 of the orphanage students in a local swimming pool. That was a beautiful event, beautiful service that we had, the baptism service, and then after the baptism service, I delivered a message to the baptized students, the newly baptized orphans and students, entitled Finding Our True Identities Through Water Immersion or Water Baptism. And in the midst of all of that, Hillary was at work hard on that day, and she was meeting with several widows who lived in Cahancha. So she was constantly being pulled to address the needs of these communities, especially regarding the widows and the orphans in those. Word of her being there and of her program were starting to spread throughout the widow community over in that part of Kenya. It was an amazing sight to behold. Then the next day, Sunday the 13th, we saddled up again into our minibus, and we were heading to a new city. This city is called Kisii. Kisii, Kisii. So we traveled these roads, and by the way, I didn't even say that about Homa Bay, our travel to Homa Bay, but let me just tell you about what it's like to travel on the roads of Kenya. It is often unimaginable. We're talking dirt roads. We're talking off-road even. And a lot of these, much of Kenya does have paved roadways. But I would say from my experience, more than half of the roads that we traveled were dirt roads. They don't really have addresses. They don't have neighborhoods like we have here in the United States. It's truly, we're talking rural, we're talking impoverished, we're talking towns that you have, between towns, you go into these extremely rough roads. We're talking, it takes you forever to traverse these roads because they're dense in the road, in the dirt roads and paths and everything. It is rough. You're bounced around horribly, and it's just not complaining. It just was a wake-up call that, hey, we are in Africa. Beautiful scenery at times. When you're going through some of these towns, it's exactly what you think. In poverty. Trash all over the place. You've got all kinds of dilapidated buildings and huddles of people all over the place, all trying to make $1 and a cent. All the while, you're traveling on these tumultuous roads to get to where you're going. And that's the experience we had when driving to Cahancha to Kisii. And it was a half a day travel just to get to our destination. And the destination, we're told, was only 40 kilometers away. But it took us half a day to travel that because it's all rural off-road travel. So once we got there to Kisii, we were taken to the local home of a Kisii pastor where I was blessed to deliver a message to 24 of the local pastors out of Kisii entitled Be Self-Sufficient in Yeshua Messiah. I was invited by Bob to address these pastors, and I was privileged to do that. As well as Hillary was blessed to address the wives of these 24 pastors. Now, these 24 pastors that I addressed were part of a Bible college that taught Messianic or Hebrew roots curriculum to these pastors over in Kenya. I think it's called Christian Bible Center. Bob heads and he runs and he teaches by himself. So I think in all he had almost over 100 students. Out of those 100 students, plus 100 students, 50 of them were going to graduate on the last great day, or Shemini Atzeret over in Sukkot. But I'll get to that in a little bit. But Hillary addressed the wives of the pastors. I addressed the pastors themselves, encouraging them to be self-sufficient in how to be responsible in caring for themselves and their families and not relying on the tithes and offerings of their congregations. So that was a raving success, met a lot of brethren, a lot of pastors that were craving to connect with this ministry and to learn of the true faith once delivered. Let me tell you about the people in Kenya who come to knowledge of this faith. They're hungry. They're starving for truth. And many of these pastors are coming out of the Catholicism and out of traditional Protestantism and also out of the Seventh-day Adventist denominations. So there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, lack of knowledge, and these men, these women are hungry for the truth. And we are almost tasked with getting that content out to these starving people. Their minds, their eyes, their lives are open to walking in this faith, and we will do our best here at TMTO, as well as through QFF, Qumran Family Foundation, to make this conveying, this relaying the truth to those hungry, spiritually hungry souls over in Kenya. So that leads us, we stayed overnight in Kisii, and then on Monday the 14th, we traveled to another rural part of Kisii and traversed up this arduous path up to a home. When I say arduous hill up to a home in Kisii, literally, you could fall and kill yourself. It was arduous, but people take this route in that area of Kisii to attend church. It was the home of a local pastor of this faith once delivered, who made his home and his property accessible to the locality, the people in that area, in that part of Kisii, to come and worship. And the bulk of this pastor's membership were widows and orphans. And here again, Hillary was on duty. She was presented to another 2 or so dozen widows at this church, and she put forth her message of becoming self-reliant, pulling yourself out of poverty, and flourishing in the true faith once delivered. And so she was able to put forth her program to those widows. And again, she's just adding more and more to her already full plate. But it's a good work. It's a good fill, I should say. And looking forward to seeing how that's all going to work out. And then by that time, we were well afternoon when we were done there. And we began our long trek on those busy highways and byways back to our home base in Kahancha. We arrived later that night. So then on Tuesday, the next day, October 15th, we're back at work again. But we're here at our home base, which was a blessing because we were exhausted from just those 3 days of work. But we had more to do, because another 12 pastors and their wives in Kahancha traveled to our home base at the hotel in Kahancha, and we addressed them as well. Hillary talked to the wives, and and I talked to the pastors, and we talked again about how the wives can support their husbands in ministry. And I talked to the husbands or the pastors about becoming self-sufficient in their ministry. And it was a blessing, and it was a wonderful time. Again, I accumulated a lot of contacts over between these pastors. And again, these are also soon to be graduated students from Bob's, remember my contact Bob over there, his school. So when it's all said and done, probably about 36 or more of the students Hillary and I addressed along with their wives. So it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Then on Wednesday, the 16th, we were privileged to attend the dedication of a computer lab over at the orphanage. The orphanage also serves as a secondary school for the orphans. So the group that came in from Georgia had pledged and dedicated and purchased computers for that orphanage's school. And so this was a formal dedication of and a handoff of those computers or that computer lab. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing to witness. And then after that, because that Wednesday night would be the start of the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot, and we then boarded minibuses that would take the dozen of us from our home base in Kahancha, take the long trek up to a city called Nagoris, where we would settle down for the 7th day Feast of Tabernacles Sukkot. We arrived there in the evening of Wednesday along those treacherous highways and byways, but Father was good and gracious and loving and kind to get us there safely. And then the rest is really Sukkot, the week, 8 days of Sukkot that we spent. I'm not going to burden you with what happened each day, but lots of activity. Both Hillary and I were able to minister during the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot. I was able to give a couple messages. Hillary was able to give a couple messages during this session. But while we were there at the tabernacle in Nagoris, we were blessed to be in the presence of about 24 believers in the Hebrew roots faith, of our faith once delivered, who traversed north from south up to north to from Tanzania. These were Tanzanians, and I believe there was one, I know for a fact it was one brother from Malawi, who attended the feast. And so we were super blessed to not only be in the presence of Kenyans, but now we had an additional almost 24. Well, was it 24? Yeah, probably about 24. I have to get the exact number, but Malawians and Tanzanians. So we had a full palette, a wonderful mixture of brethren. And if you've ever heard African singing, we were treated to the most authentic singing you could ever hear. And there were no musicians. I mean, we did have musicians. We had keyboardists, we have saxophonists and guitarists, but this group from Tanzania performed a cappella some of the most gorgeous harmonies in their language, Swahili. And it was just haunting, but gorgeous. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. Lots of opportunity to minister, lots of opportunity to learn about their culture, and to hear their issues and their concerns, which now takes me into, as the last part of this post, my thoughts and reflections on the issues and points of discussion from our trip to Kenya. The Kenya, as I said, is situated on the east coast of Africa. And it borders Ethiopia to the north and Somalia to the north. East of Kenya, or I should say west of Kenya, is Uganda. And south of Kenya is Tanzania. Now, although the capital of Kenya, Nairobi, is somewhat modern in terms of our Western standards, as I mentioned earlier, a few times, there still remains widespread poverty throughout much of Kenya. And the vast majority of the Tanzanians, if not all of them, and the Malawians, they're impoverished. And many of them came without much at all but the clothes on their backs, but they came joyfully, and they came with a willing heart to share and to learn and to grow and to experience, and they're begging for truth. They have an insatiable appetite for truth. They constantly, we literally spent all day, every day of the feast in a service, and they just continued and persisted. Even tonight, this went on, and they are starving. And it is this poverty in connection with their hunger that makes ministry in Kenya and Tanzania a challenging necessity. A challenging necessity is what I call it. We have to do something to help these brethren. They're asking for our help. Not just monetary help, brothers. They're asking for understanding of the basic truths of our faith. And recall that most of the people who were present at the feast they came from the Seventh-day Adventists, the vast majority of them, while the rest were coming out of denominational Protestantism and maybe a little bit of the Catholicism. Of interest, of knowledge, of the thirst that they had for understanding us, fell into many areas. They wanted to know more about the calendar. Not so much the observational calendar that we follow, but they wanted to know how and when the Feast of Yah occur and when they came. They wanted to understand the issue of the rapture, because they were all trained that we're supposed to be raptured up from this planet and go and spend eternity into heaven while the earth goes through tribulation and people go to hell afterward. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about what happens in the end days. Is there a rapture? Are we going to heaven? Or is there a kingdom? What is this issue about the kingdom? How is that supposed to manifest? Is it scriptural? Where do I find it in Scripture? As most of you know, I wear tzitzits, fringes, tassels, in accordance with Numbers chapter 15 and Deuteronomy 22. And they wanted to understand, why am I wearing this? Where do I find that in Scripture? Do they have to wear them? And once I explain to so many brethren, they go, why don't I have it? I need this. Where can I get them? So one of the things that the Messianic Torah Observer is going to do in connection with Qumran Family Foundation is to get these brethren, we're talking about 50 to 60 pairs or 60 sets of tzitzits, to these brethren who are desirous of getting these tassels. They want to be in obedience. The question of whether women should teach and preach in the church. It's huge because women are secondary citizens in Kenya and in Tanzania. They don't have the rights of men. So women, now the question is, how can a woman be teaching in church? Because they've been taught all their life that women need to be silent because that's what Paul taught. There's the issue of the Trinity. And when we did the baptism, there was question of why did you baptize in Yeshua's name and not in the formula, the Trinitarian concept, the Trinitarian formula of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Which brought into question, well, if what is contained in Matthew 28, where Yeshua said, baptize them according to our King James Version, the authorized version, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, when we tell them, Hillary and I tell them that it is not in Scripture, it was added, they're like, well, how can we trust our Bibles? How do we trust the accuracy of these Bibles if what you're saying is true? Then there's the names of Yeshua and of the Father. Do they have to say Yeshua? Can't they say Jesus? Are they condemned if they don't use the so-called sacred names? Then there's the question of whether or not they should keep the 10 Commandments versus the whole of Torah. You know, we advocate keeping the whole of Torah to the best of our ability here on the TMTO. And so there was a lot of problems in terms of which commandments they should be keeping, if at all. There's the issue of what constitutes the true church, the true body of Yeshua. Is it the church or is it the ecclesia? What constitutes the true body of Messiah? They are demanding, they are begging for teachings. And they want to know how they can become self-reliant, take care of themselves and their families, and support their ministries financially through some kind of business opportunities. And so these were the things that we confronted while we were there in Kenya. And it's a burden that we're going to take on in this ministry, in addition to continuing the ministry that we already have in place with TMTO. And as we progress along over the course of the next 6 or so months leading to the spring feast, and it becomes more clear where Father is taking this ministry, I will be sharing more with you in terms of how this ministry will take on the burden of this, take on the yoke of this ministry over in Kenya, as well as how you can come alongside and share in this ministry if you are so led. So with that, we're going to bring this installment of TMTO to a close. I pray that you have a blessed week. We got a lot coming up here this week in this nation, the United States. We have an election coming on, and if Abba is willing and things work out, I may do a quick post on my thoughts and reflections on this upcoming election and whether or not believers should or should not participate in the electoral process. But we'll see how that goes. No promises being made. But until then, brother, and until we come back again, Abba willing, may you be most blessed, fellow saints in training. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Take care.